As far back as early 2016, I spoke to the then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull about properties around Australia contaminated by PFAS chemicals, polyfluoroalkyl substances, cancer-causing chemicals. I also wrote to the then Defence Minister Marise Payne. We're talking about chemicals that have seeped into the soil and water tables in and around defence sites. The Air Force for years used these chemicals to fight fires. I've spoken and written to government endlessly in relation to residents at Oakey on the Darling Downs and at Williamtown in the Hunter Valley. Property owners in surrounding areas have been told for years not to drink the water. Malcolm Turnbull told me before the 2016 election and during the election campaign that, yes, we'll fix it. Words to that effect. I suggested the government should buy the properties. The government has done next to nothing, but certainly refuses to compensate property owners. There has been a parliamentary inquiry into all of this. Last year it visited Newcastle to hear firsthand from landowners. It was a horror show. The use of foam was phased out 10 years ago, but the federal government has repeatedly denied victims any kind of justice. One Williamtown resident, Kane Corfine, told the parliamentary inquiry that people just wanted the government to give us back our future. She said it's nothing short of a national disgrace. Another resident, Sue Walker, said it was a living hell. She said it's immoral and it's inhumane. The Defence Minister Marise Payne and the then Prime Minister Turnbull did nothing, though Marise Payne did write me a couple of letters. These foams have caused widespread contamination in the soil, in the groundwater and in the surface water. Emotional testimonies were given to the parliamentary inquiry. Lindsay Clout from the Coalition Against PFAS has said the first step needed was an acknowledgement of the damage caused by the Commonwealth Government. He said, quote, "If the chemical is banned universally across the country, we change the atmosphere. What I see clearly coming from that ban is a recognition that we have a dangerous, toxic chemical." But in May last year, a so-called independent panel advised the federal government there was limited or no evidence to link exposure to PFAS chemicals with human disease, but health effects could not be ruled out. Then they cover their backsides by saying that having concluded there was no increase in overall cancer risk, it did note, quote, "The most concerning signal reported in the scientific studies was, quote, a possible link with an increased risk of testicular and kidney cancer." In its submission to the inquiry, the Commonwealth Government ruled out purchasing properties affected by PFAS. I've spoken to many of these people in detail. At Oakey, you've got someone like Jennifer Spencer, who lives 2 kilometres from the edge of the Oakey Army Base. She and her partner Chris bought a 5-acre property in 2011. They set up stables and racehorses. They dreamt of building a house on the land. In 2013, they were informed of a contamination issue with their bore and groundwater. They were told the bore, which supplies 950 gallons an hour, was contaminated and they'd have to find another water supply. Then the local council told them they couldn't build a house on the land because of the contamination. Then they were told their property was worth nothing. They've both been tested and Chris had alarming levels of these chemicals in his system. They both gave evidence to the Senate inquiry. That's come to nothing. Another, Diane Priddle and her husband David, are cattle breeders. Their cattle were amongst the top 10% for their breed in the country. They bought an 80-hectare property in Oakey. They spent every cent maintaining the land. The Defence Department knew about the contamination in 2003. They bought in 2005. Had they known, they would never have purchased the property. The last time I spoke to them, the local real estate agent was telling them their property was worth nothing. Diane's battling multiple sclerosis. She thinks the exposure to these chemicals will accelerate the condition. It's only a matter of time before the toxins spread right across the stud farm. Darby Tunner lives within a kilometre of the Oakey Army Base. He's 67. He's been there his whole life. His 30-acre property has been in the family for more than 100 years. All the properties around him have contaminated bores from these chemicals. He's been tested, alarming levels of the chemicals in his system. His twin sister Cheryl died in 2015 from organ failure. The horses have chemicals in their blood at twice the normal levels. The racecourse pool's been tested. The chemicals are nearly 74 times the normal limit. The residents wants to sell up, and here we are all these years on, and we know nothing. Erin Brockovich is back in Australia in her capacity as an ambassador for Shine Lawyers on a speaking tour on this wretched PFAS contamination. Shine Lawyers have already filed class actions against the Department of Defence on behalf of residents in Oakey and Katherine in the Northern Territory, who are claiming to have been impacted by PFAS contamination in their communities. Erin Brockovich is one of the world's great consumer rights advocates. What a lady. Erin Brockovich was seriously injured in a traffic accident in Reno, Nevada. She moved to California's San Fernando Valley and hired the law firm Masri and Vitito to represent her. They won a small settlement, but she still needed to work. So she was given work at a law firm as a file clerk. And it was there, while organising papers in a pro bono real estate case, that Erin Brockovich discovered medical records that would lead to the largest direct action lawsuit in American history. Her exhaustive investigation uncovered that Pacific Gas and Electric had been poisoning the small town of Hinckley's water supply for over 30 years. And it was because of Erin's unwavering tenacity that PG&E had been exposed for leaking toxic chromium-6 into the groundwater. The poison affected the health of the population of Hinckley. In 1996, as a result of the largest direct action lawsuit of its kind, spearheaded by Erin and Ed Masri, the utility giant was forced to pay out the largest toxic tort injury settlement in US history, $330 million in damages to more than 600 Hinckley residents. The story of this battle was told, as you know, in the year 2000 film Erin Brockovich, starring Julia Roberts. Well, Erin is currently president of Brockovich Research and Consulting. I've spoken to her several times before when she's been in Australia. And when she visited in February 2016, she said to me, and I quote, "This is your country. Alan, this is your family. This is your health. This is your water. This is your planet. And you have a right to it and a right to fight for it and for each other." Well, as I said, she's back in Australia and the fight is on. As with all these things, and more especially now with drought, it's a fight against government. Erin joins us from Perth. Erin, thank you for your time. Welcome back to Australia. How are things going? Just tell us how you see the problem.
Well, I don't know that things are going good. I think it's sad that, every time I see you, we have this conversation. I mean, it's just been repetitive over and over. And now I think that the picture is getting a whole lot bigger than what anybody anticipated, especially with the recent news of, in Queensland, 70 sites. And we anticipate that number is going to grow. So it's becoming of great concern. We're in here at Perth currently, headed out to the base tomorrow. We'll be down in Melbourne. I just left Queensland, all dealing with what has just been a total lack of transparency and nothing more than a shell game in disclosing the truth about what's happening with the PFAS in this country.
So you and I have talked about this before. I mean, this toxicity is linked to a large range of cancers and serious pregnancy-related conditions like miscarriages, low birth weight and skeletal variations. How are you progressing with these law cases?
Well, we've been very busy in the United States for the past 20 years on the PFOA front, which is the perfluoroalkyl acid, which you would know as Teflon. Now we're dealing with the PFAS, just as you are. It is the largest emerging contaminant in America at this time. So the law is there, and the lawsuits are gearing up. And the same thing is happening here. And I'm a little perplexed why the government is thinking that the science isn't in. It's clearly in the United States, and that's been established. And so, again, I'm going to say over and over again what I perceive as a problem. And if we're not careful, you're going to be looking at a very large, public health crisis because it is so widespread. Why we keep having this conversation and we can't just get accountability, okay, as to what's happened so we have a way to move forward so that the people can have safe water and a better future.
But in America,
that is what I see the problem.
In America, if you're saying that the science is in, what have American governments, federal and state, done about it?
So what the EPA has done is they made a drastic reduction in the PFAS and what the levels should or shouldn't be, from 400 parts per trillion to 70. I'll tell you what states are doing. That 70 parts per trillion, because of the science, they believe is still too high. So they're lowering it in many states down to 12. There has been indication that the CDC is going to lower it into the single digits because of the science. And so, you know, just because we set a limit doesn't mean that the chemical is in fact safe. No, and science has established for us that this is a cancer-causing compound and something. Look, this is not something that showed up yesterday. Our agencies were notifying your agencies in 1987 that this is a problem and you need to keep an eye on it.
But see, Erin, you're absolutely right. You're saying this is not something that's just emerged today. I was just looking at my file today, and I discussed this with you last time we spoke. I wrote to the then Prime Minister Turnbull on June 10, 2016, again on June 16, again on June 28. I wrote to the then Defence Minister Maurice Payne on June 10, June 29, June 30, July 26, July 28, August 2, September 8, and the government's plainly ignored it, nothing, going nowhere. Now, how liable are these people and how should they be made to pay for their failure to do anything to correct the problem?
Well, you know, they look very liable. I mean, it's not like they didn't know. And now we're dealing with an outcome of something that has been covered up and not fully disclosed that has resulted in property loss, which has resulted in business loss, which is now resulting in people's health and welfare. So the stakes are really big. You know, in the United States, we're looking at the manufacturer of 3M, and they're going to be hit extraordinarily hard on this. And there's been every bit of evidence to show us we could have stopped to get where we are. All those letters that you've written to your government could have gotten there ahead of this problem. But instead, definitely, by ignoring it, not listening to you, not listening to the people, they're falling behind very quickly, which will turn into many litigations, massive amounts of money being paid out, not to mention the loss of farming and, you know, the horse ranches and the loss of property and the loss of water supply and the loss of people's health and welfare.
Right. And see, Graham, just to clarify what Erin is saying there, this notion of cover-up. Now, the ABC, to their credit this week, and Erin covered this in her first comment, the ABC issued a list of more than 60 locations identified by authorities believed to be contaminated. But the important point there, Erin, is the ABC announced that it had taken them more than a year to get access for the documents because Queensland's Department of Environment refused to release them. So on the one hand, there's the problem. On the other hand, there's the cover-up.
Oh, absolutely, Alan. The cover-up every single time. This is where I don't understand why we can't just take accountability. Stop the shell game. Because I think, you know, the gig is up. And it's happening everywhere. And you're just going to fall further behind. So let's get to a situation where we're like, okay, this is what it is. I just don't think that they can hide it anymore. And at this point, it seems like they're hiding behind the science or don't want to agree with the science. That keeps them a little bit in more of a safe position. But that's just not what's happening in the United States. The science is very solid. And we dealt with the issue there where Scott Pruitt, at the time, the director of the EPA, was hiding the studies. I mean, we had to literally force a hand. And that's a shame that that's what it's come to. And I would encourage everybody to start pushing more of the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests. Yeah. And I certainly hope that you, Alan, continue to stay on the trajectory you've been on, which has been consistent, and you're being proven right that this is absolutely set up to be a terrible disaster. Just
before we go then, Erin, you've got these matters, these class actions here in Australia before the court, comparable to what you undertaken, took and piloted in America. Where are they? When do these matters get before the court when you can actually put government in the witness box?
You're looking at next year, and not late next year, and you're looking at more coming and more being filed.
Good on you.
This is far from over.
Okay.
Unfortunately.